Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the opportunity of addressing you today, albeit in virtual format, at this, the 12th International Forum on Illegal, Unreported and Unregulated Fishing, organized by Chatham House. Experts estimate that globally about 1 in 5 fish, representing an annual value of over $20 billion, is illegally caught. In the coastal waters of developing countries, estimates attribute 1 fish catch in every 3 to IUU fishing, seriously impacting the food security of local populations who depend on fish as their main source of protein. Let's face it, if you're a fish eater, the situation I've just described probably means that at some stage in your life, you've unwittingly or otherwise been party to this crime. So the basic question that we all must face on this as consumers is, do we want to be receivers of stolen goods? Presumably not, because if you're prepared to accept things that have been stolen from other people, the day is going to come when they accept things that have been stolen from you. And so the onus is on us all during these challenging times to keep the focus on IUU fishing. As I said in my opening remarks today, we do not want to be receivers of stolen goods. Thus, we must work in cooperation with compliance and transparency as our hallmarks. The seafood sector, governments, regional entities, flag states, FAO, consumers, we're all part of the solution. Keep to the track we have set ourselves, and yes, I firmly believe the day will come when IUU fishing will be but a scourge of the past. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for your kind attention.
So, my name is Urbina, and my intention here was to elaborate on that a bit more and to try to set the IUU discussion that is the focus of your concerns today in a broader context of the Outlaw Ocean perspective about a wider diversity of concerns, be they labor, human rights, or environmental, that exist offshore, and how all those concerns are important to keep in mind when working on IUU issues. The Outlaw Ocean is a body of journalism created which takes a look at the offshore realm globally, sort of 2/3 of the planet that is water, and views it anthropologically, if you will, as a frontier, a place where over 50 million people work, a place where 90% of what we consume comes across this realm, and as such, it's essential to the global economy. This realm that also produces 50% of the oxygen we breathe. So a hugely important space where there's a lot of activity going on, and from which you rarely hear stories and reporting. You hear academic reports about it, but you rarely hear much journalism from it. One of the core goals of the reporting was to look at IUU and consider the concerns related to better management of fisheries, the concerns related to ocean plastics and ocean and species depletion, acidification, sea level rise, all these issues, but also look at what other activities are happening out there that connect all under an umbrella of a sort of dire lack of governance, a dire lack of law enforcement. The core sense is that while there are laws on the books, often enforcement is anemic, and that's partially because of the sheer size of the space and the expense and logistical challenges of policing that realm. The sort of broadening of the taxonomy of concerns that exist out there. In the end, at the end of the book, and we have now embarked on a new round of 5 years of reporting, sought to frame illegal fishing, unreported and unregulated fishing in the context of human rights concerns such as the murder of stowaways and sea slavery, or the situation in which you have captive or debt bonded or forced labor, child labor on fishing vessels typically around the world, especially in the South China Sea, but elsewhere as well. Murder at sea that goes with impunity and sort of the unregulated nature of private maritime security guards, some of them on fishing vessels, others on merchant vessels, and sort of whose job it is to police those men, and when they kill or hurt people, whose responsibility and what protocol exists for finding out whether that was a legitimate or illegitimate use of violence. The intentional dumping of oil at sea and other types of dumping at sea rather than just spills, and sort of the problem of magic pipes and the unleashing of pollutants in the water in a form that's fairly sizable and largely hard to police. Illegal whaling, the abandonment of seafarers on fishing and merchant vessels, whereby companies go belly up, they go bankrupt overnight, and they stop paying wages, they stop communicating with the workers on their ships, and those workers are left to fend for themselves. All these issues add up to a description of a realm, the offshore space, that has a lot of various concerns and largely stem from a shortfall in jurisdiction, in enforcement mechanisms, in money set aside to enforce what laws exist, and also, generally speaking, a lack of transparency and accountability in supply chains, seafood supply chains on behalf of companies, but also in fishing fleets and their willingness or ability to report what they're doing when and with whom. So part of the reporting has segued into the IUU issue in the form of promoting better transparency and accountability of what happens on vessels in the fishing fleet, especially in the part of the supply chain that's between the dock and the hook, if you will, or the long line or the net. And so the reporting has worked quite recently, and there are some large stories coming out soon related to things that Global Fishing Watch and TRIGMAC Tracking and some other sort of small NGOs or private firms are doing to try to step up accountability and transparency and tracking of fishing vessels in places like the South China Sea that are engaged not just in IUU, but also engaged in other sorts of crimes like dumping and sea slavery and murder. Only by way of getting countries primarily, but also companies, to embrace the notion that it's in everyone's interest to have better tracking of where vessels are, who's working on those vessels, what hours are they working, these sorts of basic things that other on-land fleets already have imposed on them, now being imposed on fishing fleets. Only through better enforcement and provisions requiring those things of fishing fleets is there any chance of better policing. You can't counter something unless you can first count it, and we can't really even count the extent of crime and violence and illegal fishing until we actually have unique identifiers on fishing vessels, VMS and AIS mandatory systems, onboard cameras, crew manifests, these sorts of provisions that would help provide more oversight and tracking of these vessels. So in a broad sense of the term, this is the outlook of the Outlaw Ocean and how it connects to IUU generally, and is especially relevant to IUU as it plays out in the South China Sea and as relates to other crimes. And if you want to learn more, please do send me an email. I'm at ian@theoutlawocean.com, or read the book, and I'd be happy to engage. Thanks so much for having me.